Hello, Columbia College families, and welcome to our first ever virtual Family Days. My name is Matthew Potashnik, and I'm the Associate Dean for Student and Family Support. Normally, I'd be greeting you in person in the auditorium of Lerner Hall. This year, I'm alone in my office. I think it's important to distinguish between being physically alone and the concept of alone together in community. I know this has been a challenging year for Columbia students and for you, their parents, families, friends, and loved ones. We have weathered missed events, changing schedules, disruptions and disappointments. We have also experienced joy and celebration and everything in between. It is these moments, redefined by forces out of our control, that bring us together in family and in community. If you'll humor me for one moment, I'd like to share with you a brief story about my commute to work today. Every morning, my building super places an inspirational quote or lyrics on our elevator's bulletin board. I usually cast a scant glance, but today I actually read the full quote, and I'm glad that I did. Some days, doing the best we can may still fall short of what we would like to be able to do, but life isn't perfect on any front, and doing what we can with what we have is the most we should expect of ourselves or anyone else. This quote comes to us from the beloved children's TV show host, Mr. Rogers. Though Mr. Rogers was likely off air by the time your Columbia student was of viewing age, he may have played a part in your childhood, as he did in my own. Mr. Rogers' television show, while entertaining, was rooted in helping children make meaning of the complicated world around them. And that's what we're trying to do today with your student in our virtual classrooms and with you during Family Days. I know your students are working hard in this new landscape and virtual learning environment. While different than they, you, or we had ever imagined, I am confident they are doing the best they can in this unprecedented historical moment. So I invite you wholeheartedly to join us in celebration of the Columbia family in all of its geographic spread and diversity. We have an incredible schedule for you filled with faculty lectures, student panels and presentations, and social networking. Like your students, you will be joining us virtually during Family Days, and so I would like to go over a few helpful tips for getting the most out of these events. Our colleagues in Columbia University Information Technology have put together a resource guide for virtual learning. You can view it at online.columbia.edu, and I've adapted some of their tips to share with you. If you have not already done so, take a look at our schedule of events. We will share a link to the schedule at the end of this presentation. See what sessions you are most interested in and make note to prioritize attending those. Like our students, we want you to focus on your well-being. So remember to have fun, stay hydrated, and take breaks in between sessions. All of our presentations are being recorded, so you can participate in real time or view the recordings later. Connect with your community. Each day between now and Sunday, we will conclude our programming with a virtual social event organized by class year. I strongly encourage you to attend any or as many of these programs as you like, knowing that each day will be focused on families of a particular class year. We dedicate today's social to the families of the class of 2024. So on behalf of the faculty and staff of Columbia College, I welcome you to Family Days. It is now my honor to introduce you to James Valentini, Dean of Columbia College and Vice President for Undergraduate Education. A professor of chemistry and a lover of cars, our dean can spark your interest through chemical reactions or by igniting the air-fuel mixture under the hood of a classic automobile. Our dean, Dean Valentini.
Thank you for the introduction, Matthew. As Matthew has already done, I welcome our students and you, our families, to a few days of intellectual, informational, and social events to provide more context to what it means to be a Columbia College student, and particularly to be a Columbia College student in the fall of 2020. We have a variety of programming for you and your student to participate in, and we hope you will find the programs both informative and enjoyable. In particular today, through a conversation with a group of faculty from the core curriculum and students currently taking the core, I hope you'll gain a sense of your students' intellectual experience so far, including what makes this particular experience unique and important at Columbia College. Matthew mentioned my affinity for all things automotive, but in the past few months, my cars have remained parked in the garage, for there are very few places to go and very few reasons to go. Instead of being out and about, I spend a very great amount of time in this room in our home, the home I share with my wife, Professor Teodolunda Barolini. I have spent more time in this room in the past 7 months than in the previous 17 years we have lived here. It has become my office, my study, my communications center, and for messages like this, my recording studio. My official dean's office in Hamilton Hall is now shared with several other people in the college, a different person using it on each different day, as we use every possible space available to us to limit occupancy density for public health purposes. As you view the panel discussion that follows, you will see that many of our faculty and staff are in rooms with shelves full of books behind them, just as you see behind me right now. This is a tangible reminder of the intellectual endeavors that we are working so hard to propel under these most difficult of circumstances. The words unprecedented and first ever appear in most every forum now, as they have, indeed, in Matthew's introduction. From today's panel and from other programs, you will see that we are figuring things out as we go along with no prior experience to guide us, given the unprecedented and first ever nature of this experience. As we figure things out in the college, we are bound by decisions made by the university, of which the college is a very important part, but just one part. Decisions that are constrained by policies implemented by the City of New York and by the State of New York. So our decisions are not ours alone, but the result of many people in the university and in state and city government doing their best to manage in this pandemic. Those decisions can sometimes bring disappointment and frustration to you and to your students, as they have to all our faculty and staff in the college at times. We all want to have the human interaction that is so important to the college experience, but the pandemic imposes a great cost on that human interaction. For me individually as dean, it is precisely those individual personal interactions with students, with faculty, with staff, with alumni, with families that have always been the focus of my everyday. The pandemic has cut that off almost entirely, and I feel a sense of deprivation as dean because of it. I struggle, as you do, to find ways to fill the void as best I can, while understanding there is no way to fill it completely. There is no substitute for that in-person, face-to-face, and yes, maskless engagement with one another that we all so long for. My former Dine with Dean Heaney luncheons, previously held each month during the academic year in Hamilton Hall, have had to be replaced. They've been replaced with Chat with Dean Heaney, a Zoom-based encounter with students. I still enjoy this, but I miss the real thing, being with students in person, sharing lunch with them. But within the constraints within which we must operate as a college within Columbia University, in the city of New York, in the state of New York, we are finding new ways to deliver an academic experience that is rewarding for both students and faculty. I emphasize to students the value of beginner's mind. Students would say, I emphasize the value of beginner's mind relentlessly. I do so because beginner's mind means seeing things without preconceptions, without assumptions, with an openness to the opportunity that any new experience brings. This is more important than ever. In a time of such disruption of the routine, disruption of the expected, disruption of the comfortable, disruption of the familiar, the opportunity to learn, and to learn things that will have value to us long after this pandemic has passed, is truly great. The faculty preparation on an individual, group, department, and committee level has shown a lot of beginner's mind thinking. Faculty have demonstrated great agility, flexibility, and imagination, revising, adjusting, expanding the curriculum, and developing pedagogical strategies to suit both online and hybrid courses. I would like to tell you all about plans for the spring semester. I know you would like to hear about plans for the spring semester, but these are not yet determined. The ever-changing course of the pandemic in New York, in the United States as a whole, and in the world do not allow us to announce specific plans for the coming semester just yet. Our goal is to move ever more to restore our pre-pandemic academic and residential lives, but the pace of that restoration is limited by the changing circumstances of the pandemic, one day seemingly better, the next day bringing a deterioration. But we can tell you all about what we are doing right now in this fall semester, and to that end, I will now take you to our faculty-student panel by introducing Lisa Hollibaugh, Dean of Academic Affairs for Columbia College. Over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Dean Valentini. I'm very happy to be with all of you virtually and to welcome you yet again to Family Days at Columbia. To echo what you already know, this is a very unusual year for all of us, and with so much of our teaching and learning taking place online. As we remember, as I know you all remember, the spring semester was marked by an intense disruption as we all moved ourselves off campus and moved our courses online. And when that happened, our faculty worked incredibly hard to impart the same knowledge and nurture the same intellectual community over Zoom as they did in the classrooms on campus. And I want you to know that they worked countless hours during the spring to make it as successful as it was. But knowing that we would likely continue to face the similar constraints due to COVID-19 as we have, we all certainly looked forward to having more time to plan our courses, to reimagine our courses, to redesign our courses, based on our experiences in the spring. So I want to describe just some of this work to you so you'll have a sense of what went into the semester that's currently underway. Those efforts began as soon as the spring semester was over. Faculty in all the departments started to meet to rethink their course offerings for this year and to redistribute the course offerings over a 3-semester year so that students could think ahead to utilizing the summer in new and creative ways. Faculty also began to meet with one another in pairs, in small groups, in committees, in whole departments, to have some really wonderfully productive conversations about teaching and to think together about what they want to achieve in courses that would be held largely or completely online. The faculty who serve as directors of undergraduate studies in every department or program met throughout the summer, sometimes bi-weekly, sometimes weekly, not only to get updates from the schools, but also to share ideas with one another about teaching, about technology, and about community in our virtual world. And Columbia's Center for Teaching and Learning, which provides support to everyone at Columbia who teaches undergraduate or graduate students, developed resources and workshops and training sessions and institutes so that faculty could always be learning pedagogical strategies that are particularly effective online. So for months, and in some ways more than ever, we have been thinking about, talking about, working on what we want our students to learn this year and how we can ensure that they do so. Now I want to turn to my colleague Larry Jackson to describe similar efforts that our faculty have devoted to the courses that make up our core curriculum.
Hello, I'm Larry Jackson, Associate Dean of Academic Affairs, Core Curriculum and Undergraduate Programs at Columbia College. I'd also like to welcome you and to thank you for being here with us. It's a pleasure to get a chance to speak with you. I just wanted to note that in our core curriculum, we, in addition to thinking very much about the best ways to approach teaching and learning this year, we really sought to maintain the kind of intimate discussions and the sense of community that are the hallmark of these small seminar classes. And you'll hear more about that in a little bit. In the spirit of the course founding in 1919, which was a tumultuous year of political strife and pandemic, we also sought to help students develop the kinds of intellectual skills that would enable them to respond to this difficult and disruptive moment in history. Today, we'll be hearing more from faculty and from students about how the core and Columbia throughout its curriculum has really met these challenges as an academic community. And with that, we'll turn to our panelists, and I'll ask my colleague Dean Hollibaugh to introduce our panel of students and faculty.
So you can tell Dean Jackson I could go on in describing all these efforts, but we designed the event today to allow you to hear directly from faculty and students. So let me introduce our faculty and student panelists and move right into conversation with them. Deborah Paredes is Associate Professor of Professional Practice and Writing in the Faculty of the Arts, and she currently serves as the Director of Undergraduate Studies for Ethnicity and Race Studies. Professor Paredes is the author of 2 collections of poetry, This Side of Skin and Year of the Dog, as well as a book of cultural criticism titled Selenidad, Selena, Latinos and the Performance of Memory. Her poetry and essays have appeared in the New York Times, Los Angeles Review of Books, Boston Review, and elsewhere, and she's the co-founder of Canto Mundo, a national organization dedicated to Latinx poets and poetry. Emmanuel Sada is professor of French and Romance philology and Carnoy Family Program Chair for Contemporary Civilization in our core curriculum. Professor Sada's main field of research and teaching is the history of the French Empire in the 19th and 20th century with a specific interest in law. Her first book, whose title I will read in translation, is titled Empires, Children, Race, Filiation, and Citizenship in the French Colonies. And she's currently working on 2 research projects simultaneously. The first is an historiographical book reflecting on French and European colonization as a history of the present. And the second, a project on law and violence in Algeria and France in the 19th century. She's published several articles on colonial law, culture, and politics, as well as reflections on recent French debates in the social sciences. Alfredo Spagna is lecturer in the discipline of psychology, and he serves as the director of undergraduate studies for neuroscience. Professor Spagna's research focuses on the psychological and neural mechanisms of attention, on cognition and consciousness, with a particular interest in auditory and visual interactions. In his research, he's become increasingly interested in the neural basis of attention and cognitive control, and he currently is devoting his efforts to investigating the anatomy, circuitry, and pathology of attentional networks in the brain. Artem Ilyanuk is currently a first-year student in Columbia College, and he hails from Brooklyn, New York. His major is currently undecided, so this semester he's taking a broad range of courses, including university writing, literature humanities, principle of economics, introduction to computer science, and European intellectual history. And Megan Rodriguez is currently a junior in Columbia College, who hails from Westbury, New York. She's majoring in political science, and she's currently taking a political science seminar titled Humans, Nature, and the Future, as well as courses in African American studies, English, Spanish, and physical education. So I'd like to pose a question to our faculty panelists first. Based on what you learned about teaching and learning online last spring, what was the most important thing that you did during the summer to prepare to teach your courses remotely this fall? And I will suggest that we hear first from Professor Paredes, and then Professor Sada, and then Professor Spagna.
Thank you so much, Dean Hollable. Part of what was so important for us at the Center for the Study of Ethnicity and Race is to really respond very directly to the moment and to really uphold our dedication to interrogations of power along a number of different vectors, race and ethnicity among them. And so it was very important for us to create new courses that responded directly to the moment. So we designed a class called Disease Indifference that will be taught next semester. And this semester, throughout the class I was planning on teaching and designed a new class. And the class is called Documenting Disaster. And part of what I sought to do with the class is to look to the ways writers over time have provided for us models on how we might, in terms of genre, in terms of point of view, in terms of all kinds of issues that artists deal with, and thinking through how we might go about documenting this moment that we're in. But I also challenged myself to use the medium of video and audio, which is not something I normally do as a poet. And so I created a video to both sort of announce and promote the class, but also to provide a kind of model for how the students might engage in audio and video. I'll show a very, very small clip of that, just so that you can get a sense of what I did and what I'm hoping that my students can do and do beyond as well.
Round my hometown.
That's just a bit of the video I created, and I'm sure that my students will go way beyond that.
So to say a few things about contemporary civilization, a class that all sophomores take over 2 semesters. I suppose I would speak both as a teacher myself, as an instructor, and as a chair. And I'd like to speak about what we've done collectively in CC. The 2 main issues or the main problems we had to face back in March was the very rapid dissolution of our community, right? Of our students leaving campus, leaving their classrooms so quickly. And the other thing was access to their classes, their Zoom classes, because we had students who were, 12 hours ahead, or coming back to their families 12 hours ahead, or access to text. So some of the things we have done is work with the Office of the Core very hard throughout the summer to try to, put students in classes. It seems like very simple, but it's not that simple, in classes at times that worked for them. And also we worked on access to text. We have reevaluated all the editions for our books to make sure that our students could be on the same page. That's very important. What we do in contemporary civilization is to create an intellectual community. So you need a community of text to start with. And so we wanted students to be reading the same text, the same page, the same translation at the same time. So we did a big effort to put all the text on, to work with texts that were, available online on unlimited way. That's one thing we've done. We also worked very hard on recreating a form of community, and we've trained our instructors to think about ways in which we can recreate a space outside of classrooms through small group work, through collective exercises, to recreate a sense of community for students who, again, are scattered around the world. And I would like to say one more thing about, the general ways in which we try to adapt, specifically in the case of the core classes, which are mostly discussion classes, right? The students have text or artifacts or musical pieces, and they have like a common material, and then they discuss it. It is difficult to discuss over Zoom. There are specific challenges. It's more sticky. It's difficult for the conversation to go freely from one little screen to the other, right? And what we do as instructors in the core classes is really to in a way, we are coaches. We coach students to pass the ball from one to the other, right? And so we needed to really rethink the way we could help our students be prepared, and in a way better prepared than they are in class, in a way, to pass the ball. So it means that students have to be, we have to help students, we have to work with students to really help them work on their own outside of class times, or in small groups with a few friends, to prepare the conversation, to make the conversation less sticky, to make it in a way more natural. You have to be better prepared. So we've done a lot of work collectively. I mean, I could spend hours, I'm already too long, I'm sure, but I could spend hours describing what we've done. One of the things we've done is that we have prepared passages, like really interesting passages in all the texts we do, make them available for annotating exercise, editing exercise, so students can work either together, quote unquote live, or separately if their schedule doesn't allow for that, and work together on the same text to prepare for the sessions. That's one of the things we've done, to make available passages to be annotated by students online.
Personally, one of the things that I learned from Spring and that was very clear was that somehow we needed to be mindful of the potential technological divide that our students were facing while remote learning. I have to say that personally, I was particularly lucky last semester because thanks to the support of the Center for Teaching and Learning, I was awarded a grant that made me develop a hybrid course, which means that somehow online learning activities were already combined in my course together with in-class or let's say synchronous activity. So this has made this transition during spring for my class pretty smooth. However, still there was something to learn, and I've spent the great majority of the time during the summer thinking how to make sure that this technological divide was not going to be an obstacle for my students. And therefore, I tried to move the great majority of the content, of the textbook content at least, towards the online platform in which students could meet that content at their own time and pace, and maybe multiple times, and maybe without penalty in terms of grade or grading their quizzes and so on, so that they could really, so that this kind of experience was more resistant to all those distractions that we all very well experience every day while studying or working from home. So that was really an important point. And I therefore thought about using in-class time for more higher level discussion and critical thinking. And for example, absolutely related to the sense of community we were discussing a few seconds ago, trying to have more in-class discussion so that students could relate to each other and do experiments and know each other more, that's for sure.
Great, thank you all so much. So I'll turn now to the two students who are on our panel, Artem and Megan, and I'd like to ask you both, now that we're about halfway through the semester, how has the first half of the semester been? What classes are you taking? How are those classes going? And can you give us an example of something in your classes that has really been working well online? So Artem, let's start with you.
Thank you for your question, Dean Jackson. It's a pleasure to be here today. So I want to start by saying that as a high school senior going into college, the transition was quite difficult because firstly, you're worried about getting into, worried about how college is going to be. You're worried about living in a dorm independently for the first time, about finding a new community. And the COVID pandemic added a whole layer of uncertainty to that because there was constant speculation about whether or not the college would ultimately open. And when it didn't, there's a layer of stress that was removed, the stress of living by yourself, of transitioning to college life, but there's a whole new layer of uncertainty added to that, the challenges of online learning, and which was frankly to me individually completely new, given that in my high school we didn't do too much of it. So I decided at the time to take 5 classes instead of the 4 I'd been planning to take, because I thought that I'd have more time to study and take classes because of the convenience of online learning, the fact that you didn't have to commute to class, the fact that you'd be missing out on a lot of personal interactions, but you could also spend that time in class instead. So I decided to take 5 classes, as Dean Hollibaugh mentioned earlier. Those are Principles of Economics, European Intellectual History, Introduction to Computer Science, and then my 2 core classes, University Writing and Literature Humanities. So that's a pretty broad scope of classes. And believe it or not, I've actually been really enjoying myself. Frankly, at the beginning of the year, I was quite worried about how it would go, given that it's a new format and it was a totally new experience because I hadn't ever been to a lecture. I hadn't ever really worked with a professor. Like high school teachers are totally different from college professors. So there's a lot to really catch up on, but I found the transition much better than I thought. And I really found that my classes, despite being online, were incredibly interesting. And in fact, the best thing I could say about them is that all of the time I spent in them feels like time well spent. All of them are challenging and they give a lot of work, even though you'd think it would be online and it would be a lot easier, but I don't think that's turned out to be that way. In fact, I still find myself spending hours on homework, still find myself busy and learning actively every day, but I feel like all of the work I do is quite useful, and I really want to commend my professors for making the classes as enjoyable as possible. In fact, I think they've even done an exceptional job really maximizing the advantages that online learning presents, particularly questioning. I found that professors are able to take more questions online than they are in person. Even large lectures that I have with 300 people, I find the professors take literally every student's question and everyone gets to ask a question. And the chat feature as well also allows you to constantly ask the TAs in the class questions. And even the professors themselves, they let you sometimes talk about the class content in the chat as as they're teaching. And that's not disruptive whatsoever because you're just discussing it with other students as they are teaching. And I've also found that professors are quite accessible online. Office hours are very easy to get to. It's literally just clicking a link and waiting in the waiting room for maybe a couple of minutes, and then you have a world-class professor at your fingertips, and it's quite a privilege to really have that. So I have other examples, but I want to give other people a chance to chime in. But overall, I'd say my experience learning online has been far better than I imagined it would be, and I think that's a testament to how well Columbia professors are coping with the challenges of this unique time.
So I could follow up on that. So I am a junior in Columbia College, and I have declared my major in political science, and specifically I've declared in political theory. And similar to what Artem was saying, I find that this semester I'm also loving my classes. I'm taking a political theory course called Nature, Humans, and the Future, and it's a very sort of up in the clouds political theory class. And it's exactly where I want to be, particularly in this space, kind of theorizing about everything. I'm also in an English course called The Political Novel, and that also up in the clouds, like really kind of diving into the philosophy of kind of everything. And I think it's really fascinating. So this semester, in terms of my coursework, I really do find that despite being online, content-wise, I'm really finding my academic stride and what I'm passionate about. And I do love going to every class. And I've been fortunate as an upperclassman who has declared. Most of my classes are smaller, so they're seminars. So I'm starting to have really intimate conversations with my classmates and getting into material that is a little bit more dense than introductory level courses. And I do think that professors and my classmates are really stepping up to the challenge of maintaining the rigor of the content and the readings and not sort of shying away from the tough questions and the tough conversations that we would have in person, but also learning how to adapt and how to make a virtual conversation about really intense topics smooth and comfortable. So one example would be in my political theory course, kind of the structure that we've found ourselves working with in the last few classes has been, we do our readings, we come into class, and we just kind of do an overview. Two people will present critical comments and critical reflection, and then we go into breakout rooms for about 30 minutes, small, probably about 4 people. And then we come back into the large group to have sort of a group conversation afterwards. And I've absolutely loved that structure because, of course, breakout rooms, you're kind of more comfortable having those conversations and everyone stays unmuted for the whole time. It's not sort of the raising hand function. But I've also found that the breakout rooms, I've made friends in them so far because it's inevitable in a smaller class that you'll be in a breakout room with someone multiple times. So there are multiple people now that I'm like, oh, she's in my breakout room. That's so much fun. And I've already started to figure out the, thoughts that some of my classmates have. I kind of know oh, I know what she might say about this topic, and we could pick up where we've left off in other weeks. So I think the small seminar classes with people who are really passionate about the topics and the professor who's passionate, I found to go really well. And I think conversation, and there's a lot to talk about, I feel in going on in the world. So it feels like the classroom and the content has more depth than maybe last year I saw in other classes as well. So I've been enjoying myself this semester.
Thank you.
That's great. It's great to hear from the student perspective what seems to be working well. So could I turn to the faculty and ask something similar? What's an example of something that you're doing in your online course that's a new pedagogical strategy for you? And why did you decide to try it? What have you thought about how it's working? And I'll invite you to respond in the opposite order. Let's start with Professor Spagna, and then Professor Sada, and then Professor Paredes.
Thank you for that question. Personally, I think that the challenge we are facing is, as we said before, it's about building the community. And I'm very happy that Megan just mentioned that having students, giving more opportunity to students to interact with each other is actually what is working very well this semester. So one thing that I'm doing now, and I got inspired by the career as a neuroscience researcher, is to have students interact with each other also in terms of written content. So now, like we do in science with peer review, I have my students constantly share their writing assignment and peer review each other so that they can not only talk to each other and learn what their way of thinking, like Megan was saying before, while they are in a breakout room, but also somehow provide effective feedback to each other in a written form, and also learn how to implement the feedback received, right? And therefore activating this very fruitful kind of channel of communication, bi-directional channel of communication that makes them, create a sense of community and be and relate to each other more. So I think that this is super important, and discussion and peer reviews are now parts of my classes and will stay forever.
Thank you for your questions. It's actually difficult to identify only one strategy for me. So I'm going to evoke some strategies that come from both the limits and the opportunities of the context of online learning, teaching and learning. So for example, it's very difficult online to have exams. And our students, I'm sure those who are here are not too depressed about the idea of not having exams. So we don't have, at least in my classes and in most of CC classes, we are not going to have a midterm, on the table exam or final exam. So that's a limitation, right, in a way. But on the other hand, it opens a whole space for thinking about more creative assignments. So you can replace the exam with different kind of activities. You can ask your students to collaborate on producing videos of debates, for example. You can ask, you can have them impersonate, I don't know, Plato and Aristotle speaking about gender, or have Rousseau and Locke speaking about, the exploitation of nature, and so on and so forth. So you can do more creative stuff because you're online in a way, and you can use more videos and other forms of other media, without taking the core of what we're trying to do in contemporary civilization, which is writing argumentative essays, which works well in, we still do that, absolutely, and it works well on online, because you can do a lot of editing online, you can do peer reviews, and so we have kept that, but we have added more, I would say, more creative assignments, but also more reflective assignments. So for example, instead of having a final exam, we suggest an exit interview, where the students is asked to reflect on what they have learned over the semester. And so in a way, it's giving more kind of intellectual responsibility to the students for their own learnings. That's something that I found very important and useful in the current context. Another way of thinking about this responsibility, one small thing that I have introduced, is to work actually with small group of students in preparation for any class, to have a small group of students basically work on an author, at least like twice a semester, right? To a student who does that twice a semester with 2 or 3 students. It's good because it allows the instructor to have a more to connect more closely with the students, to understand their thought process, right? So the instructor would work maybe half an hour per week with the group, and the group then becomes the experts that are, who are going to be having more of a role during the discussion, right? Because they've worked on an author, they've identified important ideas, concepts, passages, also things they don't understand, and they will bring this to the discussion. And the good thing with that is that this group can manage the chat. I personally cannot handle the chat. I cannot teach and both on the screen and do the chat at the same time. I find that's very challenging. So the students who have become the experts can answer when they know, they can answer their fellow students' questions. They can take notes for students who happen to not be able to attend the session for one reason or the other, that had some, technical issue. So they become also the secretary for the session, right? And in general, they're more responsible for the learning of the whole group. So that's one thing that this kind of small group work to prepare with a small group, to prepare the class with a small group, is very time consuming. So that's one thing to know, that actually teaching online takes more time, but also very rewarding, I think, both for the students and instructors. And another thing I'd like to mention in terms of a third strategy which is not a strategy I use in my classes, but a strategy for the entire sophomore class, is that we have created a program that happens on every Friday from 1 to 3 called CC Chats. And it's really about inviting the students, all the sophomore students, to discuss the text of the week. The text the students read almost, they read the same text almost at the same time. And every week they can reflect on the text of the week with a specialist who is going to help them see the text and its arguments beyond the text itself. So, for example, we had this program today with Michael Shadland, who's a international star in the field of neuroscience, and he spoke about Augustine and neuroscience and the sense of decision making today. For those, Megan, you were in CC not so long ago, right? One of the obsession of Augustine is how do we make decisions? How do we orient our will, our free will, right? And so a lot has happened in the past 1600 years on thinking about decision making, and neuroscience has something to say that is not that far from Augustine, actually. So it's very interesting to open a space for our students, I think, beyond the classroom, beyond the individual classroom, the individual Zoom room, right, that they share with their 21 fellow students and their instructor, and to have a space which somehow tries to replicate, the space of the campus, right? The students are not on campus, and when they are on campus, they speak about the text over breakfast, right, in front of Butler. They really, we see that on a regular basis, students really grappling with those texts in a more fun way, right, a little less, little detached from the imperative of homework. And so we try to recreate this over the CC Chats, and it's been a great pleasure to see students come and ask fantastic questions to our experts.
Thank you. In my classes, because of the way that I often straddle like sort of the scholarly realm and the artistic realm, I often have students do a combination of critical engagements, analytical engagements, and creative ones. And I find that the students often really welcome the opportunity to sort of, showcase the other forms of intelligence, right, or the other skills that they have that don't always get to be showcased. But the limitations of Zoom this year, right, have meant that, a student can't come in and, perform, their piano piece or whatever that is for the class. But what I have found that I really wanted to do is to encourage the students to really reckon with and take advantage of the place where they are in engaging with the class. And so, and acknowledging, right, the wide variety of spaces that they inhabit, not just geographically. Like many of my colleagues, I have students in South Korea and Honduras and Los Angeles and down the street, but also obviously the kind of access that they have to the various technologies of learning. And what I have found is it has provided a really, that the students have responded, I think, in such inspiring ways, because it has often meant that they've either incorporated family knowledge or even participation into the work that they're doing, or community knowledge, depending on if they're living with 4 other students, in a place in, Maine or wherever that might be. And so I want to use an example of what one of the students produced, which was, there was a creative response in a class, in the documenting disaster class, and she decided to film making pupusas from Salvadorian pupusas with her mother, and talking about like what sort of the transmission of recipes, how that meant, what that means for culture and gender, and then to use that as a video of that and her experience of that and her conversations with her mother, who was featured in the video, to then chart a larger critical conversation and video about the appropriation and circulation of indigenous food products in the promotion of nationalist ideas, right? And so it really was a very moving experience for her and for the other students to see her kind of co-creating and using her mother's intelligence and cultural history and memory, right, as part of her project. And then in another class, I had a student who didn't have access to a printer. right? And so created an artwork, right? And a project that was all about handwriting and torn paper that was, what recycled paper that they had there. So I think encouraging the students to be where they are instead of recoiling from it or sort of seeing it as some sort of a limitation, and sometimes it is, but to really sort of figure out what knowledge is literally, I think, at their hands or in their rooms.
Great, thank you. Turning back to our students now, I'd like to ask you both, what are some of the challenges that you're experiencing in this remote environment this semester? What have you done to try to address those challenges? And what advice would you give to other students who might be facing similar challenges? Let's start with you, Megan, this time.
Sure. So definitely like what the professor was saying with the CC courses is, last year when I was in the class, we loved to take the conversation outside of the classroom, and we like to kind of talk about what we wanted to talk about in John Jay, particularly in like the round dining hall tables. I had friends last year who were older, they were seniors, and they would still participate in these conversations 2 years removed from the course. And, I never had a dinner time that didn't turn into like a fight or a debate, like a heated conversation about something. And that was definitely something that I missed when we had to go home. And this year too, as someone who is studying a lot of theory, sort of craving those conversations with my classmates outside of the classroom. So that has been, particularly over food. I think it's just fun to have those conversations over coffee and food and whatnot. So I think that has been something missing from the experience over the last few months and definitely into this semester. So one thing that I've been doing is kind of leaning into the classroom a little bit more. So when I'm in those breakout rooms is leaning into that and like really wanting to not just engage with the texts in the breakout room and trying to understand what the author is saying, but also then using that space as a time for me to share my thoughts on things and ask my classmates what they think, so that, because those conversations are usually what happens outside of the classroom. So just having to kind of make the space to have our own perspectives in the classroom too. And another thing is in the classroom, it's more common like when you're leaving or when you see someone on campus to then be like, oh, hi, you're in my class, want to swap numbers and get coffee with them. It's much more organic to sort of form those relationships after a couple weeks. And that's something that we do not have this semester. So what I have been doing is I kind of have no shame. And so far as if I like someone in class, I'll just send them an email and be like, hi, my name is Megan, like you're in my class. Here's my number if you want to text me. And I've done that with my theory class and also my Spanish class. I'm not very good at Spanish. So I was like, hi, I'm a little confused. Please text me if you are too. And now I have several people in the class who like will now text me, and then I'll be like, oh, like this guy texted me. Do you know what the homework is? So, I think you have to kind of just go for it is my advice to the students who are a little bit hesitant or shy about just sending a mass email to the class or calling out someone specifically and being like, I like you, hope you like me too, send me your number. So just do it, I would say. Everyone is sort of in a position where we're all stuck in our room and we're all kind of at home. So I almost guarantee they're not going to think you're weird. They're not going to like be like, oh, this person reached out to me. They're going to probably be really happy that you did. And the worst that can happen is you see them in Zoom sometimes if they don't respond to you. So I would say just send the email. Everyone has been super gracious and super happy to have a contact in class. So that has been really, really helpful for me.
Yeah, what Megan said definitely holds. I think one of my challenges has also been avoiding feeling isolated. Unfortunately, as a freshman, I never got to experience what all the great things she just talked about, but hopefully I'll get to do that next year. Personally, I'll second what she said about messaging people as often as possible. I found that most people in your classes are quite nice, and they're in the same boat as you. They're also feeling a little bit isolated, and they also they're craving the natural social interaction that we're missing out on. So I found that I've yet to message somebody and get a response that doesn't make me feel as if I did the right thing. So I really would encourage you to reach out to people and just talk about the class. Even just, you could start conversations just by asking a random question about some content covered in class, as if like a homework question, for example, and it works fine. I think joining clubs also really helps. I've found that I've made some of my closest friends through discussion-based clubs where you just sit on Zoom for a couple of hours and just talk about something that you mutually find interesting. And that's a great way to make friends. I also think if you want to avoid feeling isolated, especially if you're maybe even a little bit less social, or even if you are social, I think it's universally applicable, just find something you're passionate about. Because sometimes work does get overwhelming. Sometimes your classes are stressful. And in those moments, that's when you feel most isolated. When you're sitting at home with like 3 hours of homework to do by yourself, that's when you feel most isolated. And in those moments, I think what I use, and I think what everyone ought to use, is really just find something meaningful. Just find something that motivates you, find like a goal, and just keep really charging at it, just really devoting time to it. For example, I love writing op-eds and I love reading history, and that's what I do in my free time. And I really find that motivating myself through that by telling myself, it's okay, when you finish those 3 hours of homework, you'll be able to go read about whatever I want to read about. That I find that really helps me get through everything and overcome the challenges that online learning poses with regards to social life. And I found that I've actually been able to make quite a few friends through these methods. I also want to say that the second major challenge I faced is staying focused on Zoom, aka Zoom fatigue. I have 2 classes in a row, back to back. So it's literally and one of them is literature humanities, which is a 2-hour class. So I have 4 hours of classes in a row. And that could get challenging, really, like staring at a screen, especially when there's a camera pointed at you. So you feel as if you're always being watched. You feel wary about fidgeting. You don't want to even adjust your glasses like this. You just like you're worried that you don't want to look off the screen. You don't want to look as if you're doing anything else. So you get really self-conscious and you get tired after 4 hours of trying to focus and take notes and process all the information you're being given in these classes. So I found what helps is just, frankly, if the professor is okay with it, just having a drink or a cup of tea next to you, not even for the caffeine, but just for the temporary 2-second distraction that it takes, the time it takes you to just lift a cup of tea off the table, take a sip, feel the warm liquid going down your throat. That's just really, frankly, refreshing. It's just a little change of pace from staring at a screen for hours at a time. And it helps you talk as well because your throat gets dry after all that talking. So I just found that having a cup of tea or even water, any sort of drink, just something to take your attention off of Zoom for just 2 seconds that doesn't interfere with your understanding of the content, that's very helpful. I think that's what I've been using to get through online learning. And as I said before, it's going very well. I'm loving all my classes.
Great, thank you both. I have a question now for the faculty members on our panel. When our first core course, Contemporary Civilization, was first offered in 1919, the stated goal at the time was to help students develop the sorts of knowledge and skills that would enable them to grapple with what they described as the insistent problems of the present. Now, across our entire curriculum, how are you and your colleagues thinking in your teaching and in your work with students about some of those insistent problems that we are facing now in our present? A global pandemic, anti-Black racism in the United States, and an increasingly divisive political climate. So Professor Sada, since I've mentioned Contemporary Civilization and you are the chair of Contemporary Civilization, let's begin with you.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. This is a great question. It's obviously a question that, we've been, as instructors, as faculty, we've been asking ourselves, right, since March, right? How do we help, our students, but also the community think these very important problems through? How do we, what is a contribution of, of a sound education to helping people make sense of all these different crises that seem to converge? So I think it's a really important question. In the context of CC, so contemporary civilization is basically a class where we discuss ethical and political philosophy, ethical and political ideas since Plato to the late 20th century to Patricia Williams this year. So question of race and gender and liberalism in mostly in the U.S. That's a class that in a way on itself centers on the question of community. What is a community? What holds people together? How do we balance individual interests and pursuits with the common good? So and many of those questions, when our thinkers think about this from Plato and Aristotle and Locke and Rousseau and Hobbes, all these people often think about the Machiavelli, right? Just having the first semester in mind right now. They think about this often they make thought experiments based on thinking about, you know, what happened to the social contract under duress, right? So it's true that our social contract is very much under duress for several reasons, and all our texts, in a way, think about this in different ways. So, I mean, it's organic. It's natural for us to very quickly use this text to speak about the present and to speak about the current situations, the different problems, the different crises. That said, one of the things we have explicitly changed this year to speak about one of the insistent problems of our present is that we have introduced as a first session for this year, in large part because of you, Larry, or thanks to you, Larry. After discussing with you, we have introduced text on race and justice to start the semester, to start the year. So instead of starting with Plato's Republic, which is what has been done, I think, in the past 30 years, just before Plato, we have introduced text on race and justice, texts that belong to a very important, deep, and complex history of political philosophy, of African American political philosophy. We start with David Walker's in 1829, and we go to Angela Davis in 1971. And the idea was that, you know, our students and all of us, we have been thinking, some of us for years and some of us for a shorter amount of time, and some of us maybe only since May and the murder of George Floyd, we have been thinking about racial justice, right? Where is justice in this country? Why is there so much injustice along racial lines? And I think we wanted in CC, we wanted in the context of contemporary civilization, we wanted to have our students think about what they mean, what we mean collectively when we speak about racial justice. What sense do we give to this notion of justice? What would be really the conditions under which we can say that, you know, there is racial justice or there is social justice in this country, and what would be the ways to achieve those conditions? And so there is like a conceptual, right, effort here. What do we really mean? What can we unpack what we mean by this? And what is interesting is that the first text we have, Plato's Republic, is a text about justice. It is a text about that tries to define justice and tries to assess whether it is better for an individual and for a community to be just. Is justice conducive to a better life, right? Or not? Or should we look for power? Should we look for material accumulation, and so on and so forth? And so in many ways, Plato's asks these questions very differently than, you know, our text on racial justice, or the contemporary discourse on racial justice. The concept seems to be not exactly the same. At the same time, it is not completely different either, right? So how does this, you know, ancient tradition of thinking about justice, how does that help us think through the present? This was really the goal of the change in the curriculum that was voted by the entire CC faculty. And it was really, you know, it was really a way of doing what CC is supposed to do, which is to give conceptual tools, right, to all our students to think about the present, but with tools that have, you know, a weight of history, a weight of you know, history of debates behind them, that people have thought those things through, and in a way they have prepared the tools. How do we seize those tools? How do we apply them, and what do we do with them, right? And to what result? This is what CC is about. That's what we've done.
Great, thank you. Professor Spagna?
Yeah, so I would say that the psychology department is committed to provide science-based evidence, trying to tackle recurrent as well as new societal problems, and in an effort to find potential solutions. In particular, this past months, we have spent a lot of time thinking about, also in light of the events brought us to our attention by the Black Lives Matter movement, we started thinking more about how our curriculum may have implicit or explicit biases that we carry on into our the way we teach, for example. This conversation is going very well. I think that one particular example that led, that was illuminating or very insightful was our conversation that we had with the Center for Justice at Columbia University, which is led by Professor Downey, and in which we discussed with some students that are that come from underrepresented minorities, what should be done, what should we change in our curricula in order to make our courses more inclusive and really for everyone. And while I personally was expecting more, maybe some critiques or adjustments needed towards our upper level courses, in reality, one of the most important thing was realizing that the students were asking us to take care of our intro courses, especially pointing at the fact that different students come from very different backgrounds and that not all of them had that fantastic high school experience full with resources and wonderful laboratories and so on. And therefore that our intro courses sometimes may be very challenging for students that did not have that kind of experience, because we kind of expect some sort of prerequisite knowledge that may not be there. And that was very, very insightful. And now we're working on restructuring our Science of Psychology, which is our main intro course, trying to avoid bias, but also trying to be mindful of the different backgrounds that our students have and how to make sure that we provide the best education for everyone.
Thank you. And Professor Paredes?
Thank you. These ideas of justice and of community resonate particularly, I think, with us in ethnic studies. And it's so, as I mentioned before, in addition to creating classes, re-examining our curriculum for the year and including classes by Professor Dasgupta on disease indifference and my course on documenting disaster, we've had a number of our faculty have found ways to emphasize these ideas of community and justice by using what Zoom might offer. And one of our faculty members, Professor Alex Larota, teaches a class in US Latinx history. And he brought in, what Zoom can offer is access to guest speakers for, a little bit easier in some ways. And so he was able to bring in two journalists from the LA Times, one of which is a Columbia alum, to talk about their work as part of the 50th anniversary digital archive or digital history project that the LA Times is doing. There's been recent work that got a lot of press recently about the ways that the LA Times is doing a lot of self-interrogation on their sort of the biases, right, that informed their history of reporting, especially against of Asian American and Latinx communities in LA. And so bringing those two journalists in to talk about the work, the research and the writing that they were doing as part of that, and what it means to do that kind of rigorous self-interrogation work without it sort of slipping into just performing self-flagellation to prove how woke you are or whatever. I think having the students really engage with people who are doing that kind of work was really, I think, exciting and provided again for them models of how to do that. And another one of our professors, and I want to share just an image, our professor Liz Uyang, did a presented a bingo card, what she calls Befriending Immigrants New, Growing, and Old, that students then had to sort of play the card to mark the particular interactions and engagements they had, or they themselves had in relation to immigration. It's her class post 9/11 immigration policies. So you can see here the ways that it encourages the students to think through their own relationship to immigration, even whether or not they are themselves an immigrant or have from families who are immigrants, or whether, or, to sort of narrow that distance, right, between what they might think is somehow not related to them. And then uses this, of course, to speak to teach from often a juridical perspective in relation to policies. And then finally, I'll just say briefly, because it relates back to, I think, what Artem was saying about this idea of Zoom fatigue, or this idea of how we then engage online. I try to encourage throughout my class, we take 60-second breaks where everyone has to turn off their screen and everyone has to refocus their eyes. And I insist every time that they move around the room. And it's like I set the timer for 60 seconds and everyone does this. But more importantly, I really try to help encourage them, our students, all of us, to re-examine how we often engage online, right? We're in a moment in which online engagement is often one that can be can actually foreclose productive debate, right? Can by the very nature of, kind of this disembodied engagement. And so it provides us an opportunity to create, I think, new models for how we might engage online and to practice them and to kind of sometimes fail at them, but then to try again each time, and making the classroom, I think, explicitly that kind of laboratory online, I think is something that we're trying to do together that's been important for us.
Thank you all. I'd like to address a set of questions to all of our panelists as a way of sharing some final thoughts. And it's a question that we've touched on to some extent in some of your responses, but in general, how are you trying to stay connected to the Columbia community? So for our faculty, what are you able to do outside of class time to connect to students and to your colleagues? And for the students, what are you involved in outside of class time? How did you get engaged? And how are you staying in touch with the people who are your friends and who are your mates in these activities? So I think in keeping with our Zoom function, this time I'm just going to call on people in the order that you appear in my screen in your boxes. So if I could start with you, Megan, please.
Yeah, so outside of the classroom, I've just been leaning into my friendships and, connecting with my friends, checking in on people, I think is really important, especially when I'm from New York, so things were getting very intense in New York kind of in the spring months and the early summer. So just checking in with people. And now that, things are a little bit safer in New York, I've been simply just leaning into going on picnics with my friends, socially distanced picnics, and just being outside. And, I said before, I feel like me and my friends, we like food, we like talking over food, we like coffee. So that is something that I've been doing with the people that are in New York with me. I have a particular red blanket that I bring with me to every picnic, and it's just always out. And that has just been really nice to just talk about everything and not just the state of the world, which is, I find a lot of people want to talk about, but more simple things too, and kind of not always staying at a very high intense level of thought and conversation. And just checking in with people, I think, has been very centering, having those conversations. And the one thing that I've taken out of, kind of the stress of having to leave campus last semester was not taking anything for granted anymore. And I know that's very cliche, but it's true. So now if I have a lot of work to do, but someone is like, hey, do you want to get coffee? Do you want to sit outside? I'm much more inclined now to be like, you know what? Yes. Like, I don't know what is coming. I don't know if we'll be separated again. So yes, I want to get a meal with you. My homework will always be there. And, whatever else I'm going on with my life will always be there. But I feel like people might not always be around and you might not have the proximity. So I think that's the one thing. The silver lining is now I appreciate much more contact, and I'm so willing to just be like, yes to everything.
Thank you. Professor Spagna?
Well, I'm absolutely on the same line as Megan, and also what Artem was saying earlier. What I'm doing is office hours, social teas for our undergraduates and graduate students, which are informal events in which we just hang out, everyone with his or her own or their own tea or coffee cups. We are organizing meetings with peer advisors in which we try to structure a little bit our advising team, but also to have them talk to each other, interact. We have lab meetings, we have faculty department meetings, but also trying to use technology like Slack or coursework to be, chatting. Because what I see that I'm missing personally the most is rather than the more structured meeting part of the story, I miss very much meeting with my students in the hallway and just crossed each other and say, hey, how's it going? Good, how are you? Good. And running away, but just having that kind of more brief contact is something that disappeared. Just, grab the, hey, do you want to grab a coffee? And that part needs to be scheduled in a calendar. So that's why we have a Slack channel in the psychology department, and we try to have students as well over there. I think that in this very complicated historical moment that we're all living, we're all learning something, and what Megan was saying, it absolutely resonates. So I think that we are learning also what is very important for us, right? And what we want to give priority. And I think that this situation has a silver lining, and the silver lining is putting each other, we are all being more aware of what we need and what we want and how we want to live our lives. So there's also a very big opportunity hiding within this very complicated moment that we're all living for growth. And this is what I'm trying to do in order to, to be reminding myself this aspect while trying to interact more with our faculty and students.
Thank you. Professor Sada?
So thank you. I suppose I do different things with different kinds of people, right? When you're a professor at Columbia, you have a lot of graduate students, and a lot of my graduate students are scattered around the world right now. So I make them meet with me. I have graduate student hours, and I actually tell them, make an appointment every 2 or 3 weeks to meet with me, even for 20 minutes, to check in, right? So in a way to replace this kind of, organic relationship that you have with your students when you see them in the hallway and things like that. With undergrad, it's different, right? So I have office hours, and I add them also to come to office hours. And I do think that students come much more to office hours now online than before. They're very eager to have this contact. With my colleagues, I've had a few meeting walks. So we walk on Riverside Park and speak, because we don't want to meet in the same office. So we speak about, an important thing we need to do on a walk. So that is has become a very nice thing, one of the silver linings of this situation. I'm right now, as you see, I am in my office in Philosophy Hall. I am one of the only professors in the French department using our office. So it's very quiet, and I must say I like it. So it's not like I miss my colleagues, but there is what is happening too right now is, as you know, as Megan was saying, and Alfredo too to some extent, it's true that because we're not together, and when we're together, we have to organize it and make it more an act of the will in some ways. We also can decide on what we think is important to do with our colleagues, when it is important to meet, and in a way we're more there is less like noise, right, around our life, our professional life. Kind of nice to be in a quiet environment sometimes. I don't dislike it, I must say.
Artem?
So this is going to sound a lot like what everyone else just said, but just try to talk to people as much as possible, whether that be your professors, your peers. It's cliche, but one of the best parts of college is the community and the people you meet there. All of these incredible people who are all there on their merit and on their talent, and for being these really incredible people to talk to. I found that it's not just even a social thing to do to make yourself more less alone. It's actually something you do to learn. If you just talk to I've been talking to upperclassmen, for example, and learning from them. I've been trying to go to office hours with professors just to chat sometimes, not even for something like formal. I found that doing that really helps. And I think you should also remember that the resources that Columbia has to offer, which are truly incredible. It's a huge school with a ton of resources, and we're lucky to be here. The resources are still available. A lot of them are online. I know the library, Clio, has made a great effort to digitize everything and make it all available. And there are so many clubs. All the clubs have really made an effort to go online, and you're not missing out on as much as you really could be without the effort that all the faculty and students have put in. So I'd say take advantage of the resources, make yourself busy, talk to professors, talk to students, use the libraries, use all the resources Columbia gives you online, and just try to make yourself busy. I know that students here and faculty here, they're here because they have a passion, and they're here to really pursue the fields they're interested in, learn more about the world. And you could still do that from home. There's obviously like a hindrance, the fact that we're all online, but you could still do that, and just really make yourself busy and take advantage of all the resources you have. And that way you'll avoid kind of laying in bed and doom scrolling through social media. Just find your passion, pursue it. You can still do it. It will be okay. And hopefully we'll all be back in person. Maybe next semester, we'll see.
And Professor Paredes.
Thank you all. I too have had many walking meeting in Riverside Park, and also just walks with colleagues and friends. I mean, there's a way that, because things have come to a halt, that there is a little bit more time sometimes to take a walk, right? I can remember semesters would go by and I wouldn't take a walk in the park. And now it is something that I feel like I can appreciate with many colleagues and friends that I have in various departments, or going to campus to actually have a socially distanced picnic with colleagues. And also inviting students, usually you invite students to come to office hours, right? To discuss works, issues in class, but I've made it this semester a requirement for my students to visit me during office hours. And the only rule is they can't talk about class. They have to talk about any other aspect of their life, or their studies. And it does provide at least a way, again, to get at some of that more informal kind of conversations that might happen, as you're packing up your bags in class, right? To leave. And so that is something that I've tried to do to create an environment where we can have, informal conversations. And then it often leads to, one, a way for me to get to know them better, but them to get to know other parts of me as well. And so that's what I've been trying to do.
Thank you all so much. I want to say thank you to every panelist today. It's just been such a wonderful conversation. Dean Jackson, Professor Paredes, Professor Sada, Professor Spania, Megan Rodriguez, and Artem Ilyanuk. Thank you for sharing your experiences today. And for those of you watching, I hope this conversation has given you a window into not only the academic experiences of our faculty and students, but also just the ways in which, despite being trapped in Zoom, how much these conversations and discussions inspire us, motivate us, and really keep us in our activity and our spirit in Columbia. And so thank you so much for being a part of it today. And with that, I will turn things back over to my colleague, Matthew Potashnik.
All right. I think, Olivia, can you start my video? All right. Well, I would like to thank our faculty and student panelists for that thoughtful and engaging discussion. I'm actually blown away by the richness and the quality of the discussion, and I want to give a special appreciation to our amazing students, Artem and Megan, to Deans Halaba and Jackson, and of course to Professors Paredes, Sada, and Spania. Our transition to virtual learning has created both challenges and opportunities, prompting us to think about new ways for our students to engage with Columbia, our faculty, and the core curriculum. And I hope that today's conversation was illuminating and helpful to you. As I referenced earlier, and as Mr. Rogers reminds us, we must do what we can with what we have. In closing, I'd like to provide a bit more information on the programming we have planned for you for the rest of the weekend. Of note, our closing activity each day will be a class-based social networking event in which you will have the opportunity to connect with the parents and families of students in your students' respective class year. So we will join the class of 2024 this evening at 6 p.m., the class of 2023, our sophomores, on Friday at 6 p.m., the class of 2022, our juniors, on Saturday the 24th at 3 p.m., and our seniors in the class of 21 on Sunday, October 25th at 4 p.m., all times Eastern. You will find the complete schedule of events on our website, and we hope that you will join us for one or more of the lectures with the distinguished faculty and student panels between now and Sunday. But until then, I wish you and your loved ones good health and wellness. And of course, don't forget to wear your masks. Take care, everyone.